Hello, friends in Sydney.
From A to Triple Z.
You're listening to 4ZZ FM in Brisbane.
An original 4ZZZ podcast series diving into the station's archives to explore the patchwork past, cultural significance and incredible stories of Brisbane Community Radio 4ZZZ.
I'm Scott Mercer, and this is another bonus episode of From A to Triple Z. You might have heard Good Morning Mr. Peterson, our previous episode about the 4ZZZ newsroom of the 1980s and the station's running battles with the Conservative state government of the day. Among the journalists we interviewed was Claire Grenet, and we've dug through the Z archives to bring you a report that Claire produced back in 1986 about the riots that happened at the Boggo Road Gaol in Dutton Park. In this report, Claire interviews Jeff Arafarula from the Prisoners Research Group and also features audio recorded outside of Boggo Road as she shouted questions to the prisoners while they rioted on the roof. One quick note, while the majority of this report is presented exactly as it was back in 1986, we've had to remove some music for this podcast format, namely the AC/DC song Jailbreak, which originally featured at several points. Where the music could not be separated from the talking, we have re-recorded some brief portions of Jeff and Claire's dialogue. Please excuse this tampering with the historical record, but 4ZZZ does not have the budget to license AC/DC for podcast purposes. And now we present this report on the Boggo Road riots, produced by Claire Grenet in December 1986.
What finally happens is that the only way that prisoners can make themselves heard is to burn the place down, to make as big an expression of anger and frustration as possible, that it can't be missed by society anymore. And although invariably the issues are misrepresented and so on in the media, there's no alternative with the way present attitudes operate within the government and the media to riots, because it's only once you have flames leaping out over the top of the walls that people on the outside actually realise that something's happening.
Jeff Arafarula from the Prisoners Research Group, talking about why prisoners are led to rioting. By now, everybody is well aware of the riot that occurred at Boggo Road Gaol on Friday night. As usual, the public have been blinded by the mainstream media as to exactly what was going on inside the jail and why. The mainstream media have, of course, upheld myths surrounding the riot, and, for example, some media reports have stated that prisoners were injured because they were bashing themselves. But if you look at the real reasons why prisoners rioted, you'd see that they were working together for the common goal of improving their conditions, which is one thing prison officers despise and go out of their way to try and stop, by bashings and generally coming down quite heavily on the prisoners.
This is called Division Jail. This is where you've got no running water, you've got no flush toilets, you're chilling the prison cans. You're treated like animals. We're not going to cop that, and we're not going to cop that. The Jews cop that, and we're staying in and we got satisfaction.
The riot took place this time in 2 Division. 2 Division was built in late 19th century and hasn't been at all fixed up since then, so they have no sewerage whatsoever. They shit and piss into tin cans every night. They're locked into those cells 14 hours a day, no exercise for all that time, no running water. They can't even get a drink of water for 14 hours a day. That, I think, is the basic conditions which would drive people to want to destroy the place. Basically what they did was they burnt out every cell. It's a logical response to those sorts of conditions. It was recommended 12 years ago in the Bredhauer report in 1974 that division should be demolished. Longland, in his report in 1985, said that it was reminiscent of the Victorian area and recommended that it be closed. Nothing's happening on that. Those people are still being kept there. There is also more specific things that have been happening. The last year have been characterised by hot and cold periods where the government or the screws would come down hard and harass prisoners a lot, and then things would lighten up and there'd be a bit more discussion, a bit more openness within the jail, and then they'd crack down again. In the last couple of weeks there's been very specific harassment of individual prisoners, like a group of prisoners would be talking and 2 or 3 of them would be singled out by the screws and told to stop talking, and if they protested, then they would be charged with a minor offence against discipline. Those sorts of things lead to loss of remission, they lead to dietary punishment, to isolation. There's no appeal, no right to legal representation or anything like that. This is a completely arbitrary system that operates within the jail.
Tension has been building in Boggo Road for several reasons. The Longland Report, which was the result of the 1983 riot, made several recommendations, including a work action plan for prisoners, a more comprehensive and accessible education program, a look into the legal system, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these recommendations from the Longland Report have so far been ignored. Prisoners have been subjected to constant strip searches, and all the complaints from the 1983 riot and the hunger strike in the remand section, which occurred a few months ago, have also been ignored. A prisoners' discussion group has been operating inside Boggo Road, and it was used as a forum to air grievances. A few of the main prisoners that were involved less than 2 weeks ago were transferred to another prison. Jeff Arafarula now goes into more detail.
There was a prison discussion group which was basically operating as a grievance committee, which had been meeting with a person called Lane, who's the director of programs inside Boggo Road, and he recently has intimated that he will no longer meet with that group anymore. That seems, or I think it's safe to assume that decision came from above him within the prisons department. Also, several of the people who were most involved in that prisons discussion group have been shanghaied. Shanghaied is where they come in the middle of the night, grab them, throw them into a prison van and take them off to another prison. In one case at least, a prisoner was shanghaied out to Waco. I'm not sure where the others went. So it seems that recently in the jail, and this might perhaps be associated with the fact that there's a new prisons minister, Don Neal, there has been a crackdown of some sort, and a tightening up inside the prison, which is only going to serve to add to prisoners' frustrations. Now, there was a riot 3 years ago. Obviously, if there's repeated riots within a prison system, there's something very sick inside the jail. Longland recommended in his report that the prisons be opened up so that there be more public awareness, and recommended a number of avenues that should be done to facilitate that. And nothing has been done on that in that area. So what's happening is that prisoners feel completely isolated. They feel like they have no alternative really. They can't carry out constructive discussion with the prisons department. They have a number of very serious grievances about the conditions of their incarceration. For example, Longland recommended that there be urgent attention paid to the legal system within the prison. The response of the government was to set up the Galligan Committee. Galligan was an ex-Solicitor General, and he made a number of recommendations. However, nothing has changed at the present. That Longland recommended that committee as an interim action until the new Prisons Act has been drafted. What's happened is that Galligan went away, drafted up his idea of what the prison's legal system should be like, and that's gone off to the new Prisons Act, and nothing has been done to deal with the actual problems that exist at the moment.
We're ready to make demands, but the screws don't want to make it. They want to gas it. They're in there. We're ready to make all the other parts.
If you look at the way prison officers reacted on Friday night, it's easy to see why the prisoners resorted to rioting. Tear gas was used 3 times in Division 2, which is where the riot began, with a firebomb made from petrol. Authorities ordered the fire brigade to hose the prisoners off the roof of Division 2, but the prisoners managed to stay there. The prisoners also told us that the screws had rounded everybody up in the yard and were bashing them.
We're ready to come down, but we want to talk. We don't want to get belted. We don't want to get gassed. We want to talk.
How many screws are there?
About 100. The riot squad. The riot squad's here. The covers are here.
How many prisoners?
Hey, what?
How many crims?
130. already got one way in the yard, and all but 42 of these builders, and in the yard just getting builded more. There's only 42 of us left here, half a dozen left in the other wing, and they're all getting back. Here gas, the fucking lot.
Did they try and take your radios away from you?
They haven't had the chance to take anything yet, but believe me, they'll take them when they get the chance. And they'll smash them. And they'll smash them to pieces. They're going to put the hose on us. Look, they can be washed up here.
What are they doing now?
They're going to try and hose us off the road. Get back here. They won't get the cameras. They've never seen a royal commission in Queensland. We want decent medical treatment. We want a decent education. We want contact business. We want parole. Queensland is what Joe said. And why isn't it the only job the left of the sex offenders to get parole? And that's just what they'll get. Nothing. That's all we ever do get. Nothing. And why are crimes against property considered more serious than crimes against people? We get out of here worse than we ever fucking first to live. Remember November 83? Remember what happened then? Hey, it's December 86, 3 years later, and it's still the same. The fella was locked up for 3 days on heart ration for complaining about the food. No heart pressures. That's it. Just locked up for 3 days. I was locked up for 2 days on bread and water.
Why have you been locked up?
For nothing. Water. The screw shit, that's why. They tell you to put your complaints in writing, and when you write down your complaint, they lock you up. The screw says have a shave, the Chris says no, they lock you up. The bloke's doing life in jail, he wants to grow his hair, they lock him up.
Have they been locking you up in the cages?
Cages are full, they took one up there tonight.
Is the whole jail full?
Yeah, the jail's back. Some of the watch houses. They're sleeping in the fucking schoolroom.
Prisoners on the roof reported that 84 of them had been seriously injured. The prisons department said that only 2 people had been seriously injured. However, 5 ambulances left the prison. The father of 2 people inside rang Triple Z and said he'd just come back from the jail, where his son told him that people had broken arms and legs and they weren't being looked after by doctors. The Comptroller General of the prison, Alec Lobban, said the men would have to drag their burnt mattresses into other people's cells and sleep on them. Just imagine doing this with a broken arm or leg.
Jeff Arafarula. There have already been systematic bashings that have gone on, and that's clear. That happens after every riot. After the 83 riot, there were very well substantiated allegations of bashings given to the Longland Inquiry, who simply recommended that they be referred to the Attorney General, and they disappeared. Nothing happened about them.
Nagel found after the Bathurst riots that, and right throughout the New South Wales prison system, that there had been systematic bashings. It's quite clear that it was happening last night. There's the time-honoured tradition of making the prisoners run the gauntlet, where you have 2 lines of screws lined up with wooden battens and they hit at them as they run through, one at a time. So that's the immediate consequence. Neil has said that they will all be charged on Monday. Now, it remains to be seen whether that will be a Section 32 offence or a Section 33 offence. The difference between them is that Section 33 offences are called major offences against discipline, and there is a right to legal representation there. And most riotous behaviour does lead to Section 33 charges. Section 32 charges, however, are used. There's no right to legal representation, and in fact it's a complete kangaroo court. The person who sits in judgment is spends or has dual responsibilities. Also, he must hear all grievances of the crims and also inspect the prisons. However, there's been a complete breakdown in that inspectorate system. Longland was quite critical of the way it operated, but the way in which the prisons legal system operates is that basically people are shoved in front of kangaroo courts with very little right to have a fair trial. If they are in Section 33 offences, they should be in open court. They should theoretically be held in the magistrates' court in town. Now, after the 83 riots, there was months the then prisons minister specifically ordered that they be held within closed courts within the prison complex. So the papers this morning didn't say anything about that, whether they were going to be in open or closed courts. From a slightly more long-term perspective, they're going to have to do something with the crims. There's about the 2 Division houses 126 prisoners, and they're all completely destroyed now, or at least they'll need extensive refurbishing. So there's 126 prisoners. Undoubtedly that wing was full. So they'll have to do something with them. Neil said, we're just going to let them rot in their yards. But that's totally impracticable because the control problems in a situation like that is quite immense. So they'll have to move prisoners out of Boggo Road, and they'll disperse them to places like Palin Creek and Wacoal and Woodford. There'll probably be a loss of privileges throughout the prison, not just in the in 2 Division, which was involved in the riot, but they'll go through and remove privileges throughout the prison, and there'll probably be a lot of residual tension and frustration, which will lead to an increase in violence against the crims by the screws, an increase in the arbitrary treatment that they get. The idea that the screws will have is that obviously something went wrong. They weren't in control enough, so they're going to try and tighten up even more. They're going to crack down even more. The end result of that is invariably increased tension, and as long as they have that sort of response, they're going to have repeated riots. It's quite obvious that they learnt nothing from the 83 riots, and even though there was some attempt to make some reforms on some of the basic grievances that prisoners had after the 83 riots, it's obvious that the basic attitudes that underlie the conditions of incarceration haven't changed. So there still is no recognition of the legitimacy of the view that prisoners can have grievances. The prisons department works on the view that prisoners have no rights, they only have privileges and indulgences. So if prisoners riot in support of their rights, then the problem is that the prisons department reacts negatively and says, no, sorry, you've got no rights, and we're still not going to listen to you. And until those basic attitudes change, I think there might be some amelioration of the present conditions within 2 Division. I can't see them now, after having significant damage to that whole division. They're obviously going to have to do things like put in sewerage and so on, or they might even decide that it's more cost effective to just knock it down, and that will be an improvement. If nothing else, the result of this riot will be that people won't have to shit in tin cans anymore. Very isolated. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen to the crims involved. Most of them are probably looking at a minimum of 8 months, and for the boys who are up on the roof, they're probably looking at close to an extra 2 years on their sentence, plus loss of remission, which might add anything up to a third of their total sentence. So they're looking at quite significant penalties. They'll also all be isolated, kept in solitary confinement and on dietary restrictions until their charges have been dealt with. That will be completely without legal sanction. That's a form of punishment which theoretically needs the order of a court to be imposed. However, after the 83 riots, it was quite clear that prisoners were being held in isolation, being given dietary punishment without any actually having been convicted of any offence against discipline at that stage.
Jeff Arafarula from the Prisoners Research Group talking about the aftermath for the prisoners. The riot is almost the same as the last, straight after a state election and straight after the new prisons minister has been sworn in. Prison authorities and officers will clamp down even heavier on the prisoners and use the same tactics of harsher and tighter security measures, which obviously include bashings. Here's Jeff.
In 1983, there was far more communication in and out of the jail. In the lead up to the riots, people were more aware of what was going on. That was mainly through the efforts of the Prisoners Action Group that was active at that stage. And so people were more aware of the specific grievances involved. There had been repeated problems with the food, and the PAG had been highlighting specific aspects of the Boggo Road regime, which had become issues and which were highlighted, and they included things like the legal system, the food, the parole, and the general substandard conditions in the jail, and there was a lot of attention focused on the fact that Boggo Road breached almost all of the UN United Nations minimum standard for prisons. This year, there hasn't been that public lead up to the riots, so it's hard to know exactly how consistent or how similar the basic events were that led up to it. It sounds like there was the same sort of crackdown, the same isolating of particular prisoners, late night Shanghais, all the sorts of things which tend to increase tensions dramatically in a prison.
Claire Grenet. The new Prisons Minister, Don Neal, has already said that prisoners should expect a hard line after the riot. The harder the line is, and the continuing lack of basic human rights for prisoners, which is all they're asking for, will just lead to more trouble within the prisons. What is needed is, first of all, for prison authorities to treat prisoners like people and look and act upon their demands. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode. If you liked what you heard, go back and listen to the episode Good Morning Mr. Peterson to hear the stories of Claire Grenet and many more 4ZZZ journalists of the 1980s. You can also check out episodes about the station's relationship with English singer-songwriter Billy Bragg and the founding of trailblazing Indigenous radio program The Murray Hour. There are more episodes to come very shortly, so make sure you're subscribed to From A to Triple Z on your podcast service of choice. If you want to support independent community media, you can help keep us on air by subscribing, donating, or buying some merch at 4ZZZ.org.au.